With that said, to kick things off, we'll start with Ms. Kathy Sullivan. Kathy is principal and owner of Talent Principles, LLC. Her presentation will focus on the challenges women, particularly working moms, face in the workplace and will identify best practices to attract, develop, and retain women. She is the author of a forthcoming book entitled Moms Eat First: Learn to Prioritize Yourself and Create the Change You Crave. I'm gonna go pre-order that right after this event. So without further ado, let's hear it for our leadoff speaker, Kathy Sullivan.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here with all of you, and I'm gonna give a little bit of background around why I feel like my experience has really led me to come and speak with you today. But I first want to, and I'm gonna move the mic a little bit, in true mom style, right? I've got my sneakers on, and this is for Michael because I have to actually run out of here. I'm missing a program, a very important program today that I was honored to be part of, which is Leadership Cleveland. So when I'm done today, after doing a quick Q&A, I'm gonna have to leave. But I'm honored to be here today. I wanna thank the University of Akron too, as well as the HR Advisory Committee for inviting me back with you today. You know, I wanna start off by saying that, you know, being a working mom, I probably didn't really understand, you know, growing up and watching my mom, who was a single mom. I didn't really get until I became a mom. And as I share this information with you today, I suspect that some of you may not get it either. My hope for you as you leave here today is that you have a little bit more understanding of some of the experiences that working moms have. I'm gonna share some research with you. I'm gonna share a little bit about my experience, and I'll share some of the stories with some of the other people that I've learned from throughout the years. I wanna start off by maybe giving a little bit of background. This picture, I have a son, obviously, who drew this picture for me, and he was adamant about coming today, and in short of him being here, he thought this was one of the best ways to kind of introduce a little bit about my background. So this is my family. On the left is my daughter, Brooke. She is 17, and she is getting ready to go off to college next year. Despite my best efforts, she has chosen not to stay in Ohio, so I apologize to the University of Akron. She will not be attending here next year. She's going into dermatology, and so that means pre-med, right? My only hope there is that I maybe have an opportunity to get some free products in the future. In the middle is me, obviously, and then to my right is my son, Parker, and he is 8. And Parker is quite a character, and I'll talk a little bit about him in a moment too. But he's 8, and he is going on 21 very fast. He's in 3rd grade. To the right of Parker is our dog, Nova, and Nova is a Great Dane. So if you can tell by this picture, I would say it's actually drawn to scale because the dog is about as big as my son, and yes, my daughter is bigger than me. The only exception there is probably the house. So I want to give a little bit of background around, you know, kind of, I feel like my life has come full circle being here with you today because I spent probably 20 years in HR. My hat goes off to all of you for the things that you're doing, especially in the last couple of years, the challenges I can't imagine that you've had to go through in navigating throughout the pandemic. So I spent about 20 years in HR, worked in a variety of industries. I worked in healthcare, I worked in high tech, not-for-profit. I worked in a variety of organizations, and primarily I worked as a generalist for many years. And over time, what I found was I was really interested in talent development, organizational development. So as I reflect back on my career, I realized that I really, you know, started honing in on the things that I do well, which I'm sure many of you have experienced too. So about 7 or 8 years ago, I decided to leave the HR function. I probably knew about 5 years prior that I was looking to do something new and really just develop some new skills and do something different. So I decided to get my coaching certificate. I ended up landing in consulting and had a great experience there. And then a few years ago, I went out on my own. So, you know, and as a mom, all of these things have really just come, like I said, full circle, because I now look at my experience in HR, the experience I've had, so as a consultant, and I will add, when I was in HR many years ago, because I think when I started off, it was early 90s, I didn't know what consultants did. So for those of you that it might be a big kind of black hole, you don't know what that's all about, I'll give a little bit of insight because there's different types of consultants, but the work that I do is primarily leadership development consulting and coaching. So my primary client is a small business owner. I work with a lot of different leaders, but I help them to develop leadership capabilities, but I also help teams to operate more effectively. And with my HR background and just kind of how I operate best, I like to look at systems. So a lot of the work that I do is really around change management. And it's these things that have really led me to be able to spend some time with you here today and to share my insights. So really, my goal is to share with you the things that I've learned through those experiences. And I want to start off by sharing a story. So it was 2 years ago, obviously, when the pandemic kind of started, maybe a little bit longer than that. I found myself in a position that I never thought I would. And that was on the floor of my closet, teaching a workshop on the topic of emotional intelligence, nonetheless. And the reason I was in my closet was because I had my 2 children home with me, obviously, and by then we were homeschooling. And my son had been recently diagnosed with ADHD. So for any of you that have children that are neurodivergent, right, that comes along with some challenges, to say the least. So here I am, trying to teach this session. And I was in my closet on the floor because it's the only area in my house where I could close 3 doors and actually lock some doors where he wasn't going to come in and interrupt me. Because prior to that, he was often coming into my office, which has doors, but I couldn't lock them, and interrupting me. And he was supposed to be sitting at the dining room table doing his schoolwork, right, on his computer. But as you know, if you don't know, for children with ADHD, it's very difficult for them to stay focused. Sometimes they're very reactive and actually can get very agitated. So if you can imagine me trying to teach a class on emotional intelligence to my clients, while my son is like screaming at me and all of me wants to turn around and like scream back, I knew I needed to go somewhere peaceful. So here I am in the closet, right? My clients, I don't think were aware of it. Thank God for Zoom backgrounds. And, I'm thinking to myself, what I thought was going to be just a couple of weeks, right, with the kids at home turned into a couple of months, turned into, the rest, right? And I asked myself many times throughout that how I was ever going to make it through doing this on my own as a single parent. And as most moms do, we figure it out, right? And that's what I did. The pandemic really, for those that could at least work from home, the pandemic ended up creating open invitations to people into our homes that were never intended. And I recognize not everyone actually can work from home. And we've figured this out, right? As Diane indicated, this is a huge change and we're still trying to navigate this and figure it out. But I do want to share that these experiences is just a glimpse into maybe what some of the moms here, the working moms, and those of you that are online have maybe experienced. And my hope is that you've been able to kind of navigate and work your way through this too. So what I'd like to do, oh, and by the way, that's not my closet, just in case you were wondering. What I'd like to do is to learn a little bit more about you. Now, I suspect we have, obviously, a lot of HR professionals here. We've got some business leaders and some working moms and maybe some other roles scattered in here. But I'd like to do a quick poll just so I can learn a little bit more about you and understand maybe where to lean in a little bit more into my content today. So if we could go ahead and launch the first poll. So I know that you probably experience or can do or can relate to all of these, maybe a couple of them I should say, but I ask that you choose one. So some of you might be a working mom and a leader of working moms and, right? Okay, so give it a few more seconds. Majority working moms. Next is other, HR practitioner or professional, right? Recognizing too, depending on your title. Okay, so that helps. Thank you all for participating there. So I just wanted to kind of gauge who I'm talking to, and the reason for that really is, so it's an empathy thing, right? I think the more that I can understand my audience and the topic that I'm sharing, I can hopefully resonate a little bit more with you. So, the one thing that I wanna start off with is, when I work with coaching clients in particular, there's a couple of things that I go through really for me to learn a little bit more about them, but also for them to gain some awareness around what's important to them. So some of those things that I begin to explore with them are the priorities that they have in life. We look at what they do and why they do what they do, right? What brings them engagement as it relates to their profession. We talk about core values, but throughout that process, inevitably, what I find my clients say is most important to them is family. We all, right, want to do jobs that we love, that we really do well, and that we're engaged in doing, but at the end of the day, there's something we go home to that has a lot more meaning to us, and many say that's their family. Now, the reasons for that might be different for people. So what I mean by that is, if I am a single parent, right, I might be, my family might be a priority for me because I am the primary breadwinner, right? The financial aspect of me and the work that I do is really critical. For some, it might be that, or it might be I'm the primary caretaker for my family, right? So it's important to also peel that back a little bit more as we think about the why and how family is important, because that then kind of gets to what drives us, what drives our decision making, and how we show up with people, okay? So I think that's really important to kind of recognize, and it's why I wanted to, I'm looking forward to speaking with you today. So there's two primary objectives that I have for you that I want to share. One is really to help you gain some awareness, right? It's providing more insight to some of the challenges that working moms have and why that is, and also to help facilitate change. So it's providing some options for you, some actions to maybe make improvements either for yourself or within your organizations, okay? So some of you might be wondering, okay, so what's the issue? And there are probably a variety of issues that working moms experience, and I'm gonna focus just on 3 today, which I'm gonna talk about shortly, but obviously kind of why and how we got here. The issues for working moms are not new. They have been around for many years, and unfortunately, the pandemic just kind of magnified them. And as we think about the Great Resignation, we can actually look at this and realize it was kind of the Great Resignation of women, because women left the workforce at a rate of 4 times men. That's pretty astounding. And many of them left because of access to childcare. For me, right, as a business owner, I remember my son was in a preschool at the time, and the preschool closed down. And that was very stressful for me, and as I'm sure it was for many of you, and not just moms, but families, right? So now what do? You've got to scramble and figure it out. So, and many of those places haven't opened yet. And furthermore, when we look at the cost of childcare, that has, also impacted families. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But at the end of the day, working moms that are exiting the workforce, they risk having opportunities for the future. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And there's a few other things that I also want to share with you. And why this is important is because women do add distinct value. And while this research I'm sharing with you is in reference to women in leadership, I think we can all agree that as we look at some of the contributions women make, right, from a gender standpoint, there are some nuances. So this research was done by Pew Research, and basically what they did was they surveyed employees, and many of those employees cited some of these differences when there were more women in leadership roles, and one of them was increased employee retention. They identified differences around focus with employee development. They seem to be more collaborative in their decision-making. Women also tend to more actively support diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And last, and maybe, more important, at least for some of you out there, is that, having women in leadership roles within an organization actually contributes to higher return on investment. So these are just a few reasons for ensuring that, there is equity, diversity and equity within the organization and inclusivity, and we're going to talk about that too. Okay? So I want to start off with one of the first issues impacting moms, and that is called the Motherhood Penalty. And some of you may have heard of this term, maybe not, but essentially what this term means is that women with children are at a disadvantage in some respects as it relates to women that don't have children. And the gap is even bigger compared for that scenario compared to women versus men, okay? And with this, there are some assumptions that come along with the motherhood penalty. I'm going to share some examples. Some of this, as I go through this, I encourage you to kind of reflect on your experiences that you're having at work, and we'll talk about some solutions. So the first assumption is, working moms lack the qualifications for selection and promotion. And there's research that shows actually women with children are less likely to be hired, and the gap is even bigger for women that are going to be promoted as it relates to women with children, okay? But the reality is, when you think about working moms gain a lot of transferable skills. So certainly this depends on where they are within their careers, but especially for women that have children that are a little bit older, even when they're younger, there's some things that we learn, and I'm sure all of you moms can relate to some of these. So motivating others. This is probably going to be more related to women that have older children. I can relate to this a little bit, I think, because I have figured out how to motivate my daughter to clean her room, and it's simply taking her phone away. So, we identify kind of what drives people. My son is still kind of a work in progress. Emotional intelligence is an interesting one, and I don't have the data to back this up, but I do recall reading that when women have children, and I'm sure this is even for people who adopt, right, there is an ability that we develop, it's a chemical in our bodies that helps us to respond to our children. And this gets back to the emotional intelligence piece, right? Our ability to read social cues in others is really important, and then our ability to demonstrate empathy and respond accordingly is really important, especially as a leader. Problem solving. I am sure all of you working mothers have a lot of funny stories about how you figure it out to do something with a newborn in your hand and maybe two in your hand. I know someone I met earlier has 2 new twins, so congratulations to you. But as you can imagine, we have to figure things out pretty quickly, especially with babies. Coaching and mentoring, right, that comes along too. You've got kids that get older, they've got issues with their friends, they've got sports, they've got problems with schoolwork, so that, a lot of time is spent there, and then project management. And some of these, right, kind of on a sliding scale, depending on the mom, depending on her skills, but these are some things that certainly translate into the workplace. Another assumption is that working moms are not committed to their careers, but in reality, moms have different seasons in life, right? So the first thing that's important to think about is that personal situations are different. So depending on the age of their children, right, might depend upon kind of what they're doing. And I was talking with a mom earlier who said, she's got 4 kids. She moved in to Ohio from another state and went into teaching, right, because that allowed her the opportunity to kind of spend some time with kids. So it's just looking at kind of the holistic picture and what allows us to kind of do our work, do what we do well, and be able to be a good mom. So situations are unique for each individual. Everyone has differing aspirations. I would say the vast majority of the women that I work with from a coaching perspective want to advance, and a lot of research out there supports that too. And the last one is many working moms want career identity. The mom I was talking with earlier said the same thing. She has the opportunity right now to kind of stay home and be with her children, and my words, right, kind of chomping at the bit, like ready to get back out there. And this is something I too experienced. There's many days where I need to leave the house. It's not good for my mental health to stay in some of that chaos. So I'm sure many of you can relate to that too. And there's some other challenges as it relates to the motherhood penalty that some working moms might experience. So the first one being lower competency ratings. And certainly this is not the case across the board. I share this with you simply to develop some awareness for you all to be mindful, especially for those of you leaders that maybe manage working moms. So lower competency ratings, there's research that shows that sometimes what happens is women with children get dinged because they are requesting more flexible options, right? So that can sometimes cause lower ratings. We get overlooked for stretch assignments potentially. And there's a story that I actually heard recently from a mom that I was talking to. I don't remember if it was her or someone else she knew, but essentially this woman was overlooked for a great opportunity, and the male colleague that was part of making the decision said to her, well, I didn't consider you because I know you're a mom and this requires travel. So, not maliciously intended to not include her, he thought he was doing the right thing. And when we talk about systems, when we talk about decision making and opportunities, it's moments like that that occur on a daily basis and people miss out. And in this case, it's the working mom, right? In other cases, it may be other marginalized groups. So I think it's really important for us, and I'll talk more about this later, to really look at the decision points that we make within organizations and as leaders, and ensuring that we're taking a holistic approach and a more inclusive approach. Another one to consider as we look at the other challenges, inequities in compensation. This is probably not new to any of you. I think right now the women make about 80 cents on the dollar for what men make. For working moms, it's actually less. I want to say it's 69 cents or 70 cents. So something else to think about. And the last one here that I'll share is the higher punctuality standards. This maybe ties a little bit to the first one that I mentioned. But essentially, there's research that shows that women with children are held to higher punctuality standards given some of the personal things that they experience. And this really brings into focus, in my opinion, the importance of really identifying and talking through these ideologies of what an ideal worker means and what a good mom is, and whether or not they can actually coexist. Because as we think about what a good worker is, I'm sure many of you would say it's someone that, is devoted to their job. They're working all the time, right? They're available via email all the time, on weekends and at nights. They might take time off, but if they take time off, they're available when they're on PTO, right? A good mom, completely devoted to her kids, her family, right? Too emotionally absorbed in all of that, right? Can they be the same? Can they kind of interact? What do you think, right? And to some extent, I think we are socialized to give in to these norms. So what I challenge you to really think about is, what is an ideal worker? And for you working moms, you are good moms, right? Even if you do choose to go to work, right? And your kid's at home crying, it's still okay. The second issue that I want to talk to you about is supermom syndrome, and I think it's important to highlight a couple of things here. So in one sense, supermom syndrome can be a characteristic of just how some women are driven to want to do it all and to try to do it all, right? But also to some extent, what I'm going to talk about next, some women don't have the choice as it relates to their personal circumstances and their financial status. So supermom syndrome essentially is suggesting that moms can do it all, should do it all for everyone all the time, okay? So keep that in mind. Now, given the work that I do, I can't help but to kind of put things in an org chart and put them kind of organized, so bear with me here. So as we think about supermoms, right, many working moms obviously have their career, whether they're working part-time or full-time. That's their first shift. But as we look at kind of the second shift that working moms have, and granted, this is going to vary for every mom, they're basically the chief home officer, right? They're a people manager because they're generally managing their kids, their spouse, yes, to some extent, right? And maybe aging parents, right? Many of us have parents that are aging that we have to also help with. We also managed internal operations. So that might look like the chores, the meals, sometimes the finances. There's probably a whole other host of things that you could add here. And the last one is cruise director, right? So we have to plan and all the events, we have to take care of the activities, decide what we're doing as a family, and then make the plans, do the scheduling, ensure everyone's in the car on time. The appointments, and the one thorn in my side is the amount of school paperwork that I have to do for my kids. I wish I could have like a part-time assistant just helping me with that. And then the sports, right? And again, this probably varies for all of you. A couple of things to note here. One is that research actually shows throughout the pandemic, and again, women were primarily focusing on these responsibilities prior to, but during the pandemic, it was identified that women actually spend 3 times more time doing these things than others in their household. And it was even worse for women of color. So Latinas, I think it was about 1.6 times more than white women. And for Black women, it was twice as more than white women. So something to think about. The last piece here is kind of the third shift. So some of you may have heard of the mental load, the invisible load. 2 things here. One I kind of mentioned earlier is what they found throughout the pandemic. McKinsey did a lot of this work, this research, and what they found was women tended to provide a lot more emotional support to others in their organizations throughout the pandemic, right? So that's something that we're now putting energy into potentially. But the other piece of this, as many of you may recognize or experience yourself, is kind of the 3 a.m. wake-up call and the worry in your mind where you're sitting up in bed thinking, I didn't get the stuff ready for my kid tomorrow and it's spirit day at school, or I didn't send the permission slip, or I didn't do a good job today, or I was on Zoom and I was yelling at my kid and I wasn't on mute, right? Whole list of things. So this is kind of what they refer to as the mental load, and I'm sure men have it too to some extent. I don't want to miss that, but for women especially, as you can think about these responsibilities in addition to the work, this can be a challenge. The last issue that I want to talk about is affordable childcare. And mind you, I am not an expert here, but as I did research, this was something that really just popped out to me that I felt really important to share with you, because when you think about it, right, the health, the well-being, the education of our children is our future workforce. And if we can't take care of our kids, where are we all going to be in the future, right? So I want to share just a couple data points. The first one is, and there's a program called the Marshall Plan for Moms. And forgive me, I'm drawing a blank on the woman's name. She, the founder was, she founded the Girls That Code. She's really running this national campaign to really help change the childcare system. And I'll share a link for that at the end. But this research that was done identified that U.S. childcare exceeds the affordability levels of 80% of families, and that is a really scary statistic. Here in Ohio, there's a couple links at the bottom here. The average wage for a childcare worker is $13 an hour. I think you can probably go to Walmart and make 18. And these are people that are taking care of our children and preparing them to come out and work for you in the future. Women who currently in Ohio, and this I think is Northeast Ohio data, women that are currently out of the workforce that were surveyed, nearly 60% of moms said that they would return to work if they had access to affordable childcare. So this is a significant issue. And for some of us, right, myself included, I feel very privileged, and I am privileged. But as we look at, again, where there's some disproportionate impact to what happened with the pandemic and putting women out of work, not being able to work, not being able to take care of their families. As we look at households, divorce rates high, right? Many of those households, single parent households, 80% of them are led by women, okay? So this is really important. I want to take a moment. So what I'd like to do is to ask the working moms first, if you could respond to this. So this is just for working moms. There's a poll that I'm going to launch, and this question says, what's your biggest challenge? What I'd like you to actually do is to select all that apply. So what are some of the challenges that you have right now as it relates to being a working mom? So I'll give a few seconds for you to respond to that. I'm going to seek guidance from Rock the House. Give it a couple more seconds, right? Okay. So this is not surprising to me. I don't know that I mentioned this earlier, but I've coached a lot of working moms over the years, and that top one, is there a way to bring that back up? Thank you. So if we can stay on this slide for a moment, I can't read the percentage. I think it's over 80%. 90%. I am overwhelmed with responsibilities across home and work. So I want to just spend a moment here, if I may, right? So some of you throughout what I'm sharing with you might think to yourself, this has nothing to do with me. What the women or the men, for that matter, have going on at home has nothing to do with me as a leader or our business. And you would be right in some regard. But if you think about when your employees are thriving, whether they're working moms or not, when your employees are thriving at home and they're healthy and things are going well, they've got their stuff figured out, they've got things prioritized, they're organized, they're much better engaged and productive employees, are they not? Right? So this is, again, I hope is enlightening for all of you who maybe aren't a working mom and manage a working mom or run a business and have working moms working for you. We'll talk about this here momentarily around some solutions, at least some things to think about. I have challenges with childcare. Okay, so I'm feeling treated unfairly. Don't have flexibility. It sounds like that's, it looks like things are really, what I would say, a lot of things are being done to kind of address some of these challenges. So challenge with the childcare, I would say the primary challenge there, and again, I'm going to talk about this, that we don't always think about is kind of the emergency situation. So I'm going to put a pin in that for now. Thank you for participating. You can take that down. Thank you very much. So I want to spend a moment just to talk about, what do working moms want? And this research that I'm sharing with you was done by Indeed, and it was a couple years ago. I suspect that these top 3 haven't changed all that much, and there maybe are a few that they would add, but the 3 things that women shared from this survey is that they want flexibility, they want stronger benefits, and a supportive boss. Right? So when we think about our audience here, those of you that are leaders that manage working moms, take note, right? Those of you that are in human resources and can look at the benefits that you have, take note, and we're going to talk about those too. There's a variety of solutions, but we all have to contribute to helping them. So what I want to do as I begin closing out my time with you is share some suggestions, and I want to highlight that these suggestions come from my experience both in HR, which was though a long time ago, but also working with leaders that manage working moms, my own experience, and again, my experience in working with a lot of working moms. So there's a couple of things for each of those groups I'm gonna make some suggestions around, and then I'll take some questions here shortly. So the first thing is to prioritize what's important. Now, yeah, that seems pretty basic, right? But if you think back to the screens that I showed you, it's not always easy to kind of sit back and really think about all the things that you have. It is a process, and it takes time. And some of those decisions are really hard. And quite honestly, sometimes the ramifications of the people that have to live with the decision that those working moms make is even harder to navigate, right? So this is not as easy as it seems, but it's important because we can't do everything all the time for everyone. Even though you might want to, it's really important because at the end of the day, that type of behavior is not sustainable and it's not good for our overall well-being. The second suggestion here, recommendation, is to know and show your value. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, value to me is really about, where do you contribute the best of yourself, the best of your talents, the skills that you have, the knowledge at work. And if you don't know that, find a way to figure it out. Talk with your boss, talk with your colleagues, ask what your strengths are, but figure out how you add value within your organization, and then you have to show it. And I say this because as I get into my third point here, leaders, HR professionals, right, anyone that's in decision-making authority is going to look at someone that is making a request and wants something. They're going to be looking at, okay, where's the win-win here? So we have to figure out how we can add value, right? If you are not performing at levels you should be, if you have attendance issues, whatever the case may be, it might be a little bit harder, but I do think that this is important for us all to kind of figure out. And the thing that Diane mentioned around the sway, right? So sway, and I don't recall the gentleman that coined this, or if it was a gentleman, maybe it was a woman. It's essentially replacing the work-life balance, work-life integration terms. And the idea behind it is that when we are at work, we're 100%, 110% invested, right? We lean into work, we do a good job, and when life calls, we show up. It means that we're present, and that can be really hard to do, especially, again, given what I've talked about today. So when we think about time, we all have the same amount of time, right? Integrating work and life, right? Balance, never worked for me. But when I think about what I have to lean into when I have client work and when I have an issue with my kids, I have to be there. And I still need to work all this out, okay? And that means I have to be a good communicator. And that's the third piece here. So we need to communicate our needs and align on solutions. And this might mean different things to all of you, but there's a couple points that I want to highlight here. One is knowing what you're asking for. And if you haven't done step number one to prioritize, it's really hard to figure out, what do I need to ask for? And when we think about flexibility, flexibility is an example of something that means different for everyone. What I think is flexible might be very different from all of you, okay? So knowing how to communicate your needs, being very clear on that, and also asking in an emotionally intelligent way, okay? I like to use the example of I am woman, hear me roar. Standing up on the table and expressing yourself is probably not the best way to get a leader to agree to something. And this is where the emotions come in, right? And we all have them. And by the way, moms have this thing that happens with our hormones that sometimes we just can't help. So we have to be mindful around that too, okay? The aligning on the solutions, what I mean by this is when you're asking or making a request of a leader or anyone else, you have to anticipate what are the business challenges right now. I think it's always a good idea to kind of step in the other person's shoes and to think about what their priorities are, what are their constraints, and then when you share your request, that you do your best to kind of align it with that and articulate what the potential benefit's going to be for them. So that's really influencing and negotiating at its best. So I want to spend a couple minutes on human resources. So I think there's some things, and I would suspect many of you are already doing this, The first one is to really think about enhancing the value proposition for parent-focused employees. And I would say this goes across the board, right? This is going to encompass looking at your HR policies. It's going to look at benefits. There's a couple of things that I want to highlight as it relates to benefits that are specific to working moms that I would suspect that many of you are already doing. But one of them is certainly looking at parental leave policies, right? And that goes for men too. Many men I see are starting to take time off with their children, and that's not so much of not a stereotype, but I think sometimes men are looked at differently if they take time off with their children. So that's something that I'm starting to see more of, which is good. Looking at return to work policies, right? It's those transition points that moms experience is really important to make sure that they're supported. Also, some of your benefit offerings. There's some unique ones that I've heard some of the individuals I've spoken with over the last few months. One is I've seen some companies start to give subscription access, paid subscription to like care.com. And that helps with, getting especially emergency childcare in place. That can be helpful and beneficial. A concierge service. I would die to have a concierge service. I don't know if any of you here are doing that, but I know some companies, I think down in the Medina area, are starting to look at providing that for all employees, not just their working moms. Those are the primary ones that I think, and even employee resource groups providing, yes, you're doing that? So the concierge service, it kind of runs the gamut, and it might be related to, I'm forgetting the term, this has been many years, that they kind of offer supported services to kind of help like finding adult care for if you have aging parents, right? They help with legal services. A concierge service can also mean like having like someone do shopping for you. It can be a number of things. I'm sure there's a number of different types of companies out there that do that. But if I had, again, a personal assistant that could do all of that for me, I'd be golden. So those are just some things to think about, right? But what is the what's the value proposition for your organization? And this gets to why would working moms want to come and work with you, right? Work with your organization and stay. What would keep them to stay? The second idea here is to evaluate systems for bias and break down cultural barriers. And again, I'm really simplifying this here. There's a lot that goes into this, but I used the example earlier around how decisions are made, and that is just a small example, and it's not written in a policy. You need to have the trust with your leaders and the trust of your employees to really understand what's going on kind of behind the scenes. Because I can't tell you how many times I've talked with individuals that we see how decisions are made in organizations, and unless we are very clear around how that happened, what were the criteria that got us there, this is where mistrust occurs among the employee base, right? So a couple things to keep in mind here as it relates to systems of bias. You've got to know your demographics. It's not just related to working moms, but what is your demographic base, right? And it's looking at the needs of those demographics. The other thing here, when I talk about decision points, I think is really critical. One, from a talent management standpoint, I think that there's some really key areas to look at, certainly as it relates to selection and how decisions are made around selection of talent, and certainly for development. So when you're running programs, how do you select who those people are? How do you ensure that it's a diverse group of people that have potential, right, that are going to be able to contribute to the organization? And sometimes those people aren't identified if the group that's making the selection don't have exposure to all these other people that have great value, right? So this is why the DE&I focus here becomes really important. So on the talent management side, it's really, again, when those transitions occur. On the benefit side, obviously the benefit renewals are important, but also looking at the notification process, not just to the business, but to leaders. And the leaving work and returning to work are big transition points. And then the last piece here for the HR professionals is to coach and train your people, right? So I would suggest targeted training, because as it relates to managers, Depending on the needs of your business and what you find the demographics are and what managers struggle with, their coaching and development might need to be targeted. But a couple of things just to think about given this topic is around bias. It's around your policies and what's expected. If you've got values that are defined for the business, those are important to kind of embed. And certainly the compliance piece, right? There's some of these things that managers do can get the business into trouble. It creates risk, right? And that's the stuff that, you get a lot of the eyes rolling and I don't want to go to this training again. But if we can provide real examples of the behaviors that we see, it can help resonate with people. And then lastly here, it's, what can you do to help advance women in your organization, whether they're working moms or not. The last group here are leaders. So this is for all leaders, but specifically for leaders, especially that manage working moms. Examine your assumptions and gain some perspective. And what I mean by that is it's really about gaining some self-awareness. If you do manage working moms, take some time to reflect on your own assumptions about that individual or women that maybe report to you. And that is important because then that means potential action. So advocating for and supporting them is really important. And I think it's also maybe important for me to highlight that I think maybe some of these discussions are perceived as taboo, right? For whatever reason, some of you might be really uncomfortable. You might be uncomfortable asking about how a mom's kids are, right? You might not see that to be your place, but I will guarantee you if you simply ask your working moms, how are you doing? Tell me about your kids. Tell me about the challenges you have. What can I do to support you? You'll learn a lot. The last one here, and again, these might seem pretty straightforward and obvious, but it's partnering with HR on solutions to retain talent. The one thing that I've always really appreciated about having in my experience in working in HR is the visibility into the business. Being able to understand what the business strategic objectives are, where are we headed as a business, what are the challenges our leaders are having, and to have insight to what do employees complain about is pretty cool. And HR is kind of the only place you get that. And a lot of it comes down to trust, which I know Sherry is going to talk about here. But I always saw my role in HR as kind of trying to help close the gap. How do I get them to understand more about them? And how do I get them to understand more about them, right? That's a tall order. So leverage your resources, okay? Partner on these things. I want to take a quick moment, if I could, to poll. I know I've got my 3 minutes. I'm counting down now, so let's just do this quick. I want to hear from some of you. This is for HR leaders and professionals, right? So what are you doing right now to retain talent, to attract and retain talent? Specifically working moms. That's obviously the questions in our topic today, but I'm curious to see what you're doing. So select all that apply. So flexible working schedules, DEI training. Well, it's interesting how fast this changes. So flexibility is not a surprise. That's good to see. And again, that means different things. I'm glad to see that there's more training, enhanced benefits, great. Employee resource groups, targeted coaching and development. Well, you can call me. Child care programs. Is that last one, is that just cut off? It is, okay. Yeah, I think that, on my next slide, I know we can't see the results of the child care programs, but given my time, I'm gonna quickly move forward because I wanna share just a couple of things for you to think about. Can we remove that slide? Thank you. So I wanna share just real quickly, these are some companies. I mentioned the Marshall Plan for Moms, the research that was done. These were examples that were taken. So Bank of America does a child care subsidy. They provide up to $275 a month For formal and informal, meaning it can be daycares or nannies or babysitters, which is really nice. And then you can see some of the other qualifications. Patagonia has had an on-site childcare center for 30 years. They really pride themselves in being a workforce that supports working moms. They do it on a tuition sliding scale. What I love is that they have recouped 90% of their costs because of their ability to have engaged employees and retain them. Highland Software here in Cleveland, I know, has an on-site childcare too. I know this is not possible for every business, I get that. The last one is Synchrony. I think it's a finance company in Connecticut. They conducted a survey of their moms, and what I like about this is they do the 60-day, I can't read it from here, it's essentially kind of an emergency thing, right? And I think, again, that's where a lot of working moms struggle. And they also provide a lot of things for their kids. So in closing, I want to just remind you that, again, as I've worked with probably hundreds of clients over the years and talked with people about what's important to them, it's their family. So I challenge you to ask yourself how you can make that a priority too. I want to end just by sharing a couple of the resources that I mentioned. The McKinsey Women in Workplace is some of the data I referred to. The Marshall Plan for Moms is a great thing I would encourage you to look at. There is guidelines from EEOC on workers with caregiving responsibilities. If you aren't familiar with that, I would encourage you to take a look at it because this is the compliance piece. And then I didn't reference this. There's two other sources here in Ohio that I just want to mention, and that's Team NEO. They do a lot of research, and they have a report called the Lost Opportunities Report, which is great. It's very focused DE&I, but they share a lot of the work that they do regarding women in the workforce. And then the other one I just want to mention is Where Are All the Workers? And I'm drawing a blank too on that, but I'm happy to share that here with any of you that want it. So I want to thank you all for your time today. If you'd like to scan, this is just where you can get more information about me. But with that, I have a red light now, so I'm going to stop talking and answer any questions that you might have. So thank you.
So much of that, so thank you very much. So at this point, we're going to ask the audience to scan the Slido QR code one more time, and this is how you'll be able to answer questions that I will then relay to Kathy to answer. There you go.
Yes.
Fantastic. In the meantime, I have a couple of questions just of my own to get us kicked off. And I was jealous of that. I'm glad that you said that wasn't your closet, because I thought if I took a meeting in my closet, it would not look like that. So. Since we have so many working moms in the audience, we saw that from the poll, I'm curious, you had some advice on prioritize, know your value, communicate your needs, and until your book comes out, what are some resources for moms who might not know where to start in doing those things?
Gosh, as far as, I guess I'll share more steps, right? There's a couple tools that I use with clients, and one is, it's called the Wheel of Life, right? So part of it is really just prioritizing, stepping back and looking at what are the areas in your life where you are spending your time or want to be spending your time. So that might be work, it might be volunteer work, obviously family, it might be friends or social areas, which I haven't really spent much time on, right? Just given my lifestyle. Exercise might be another, so it's really just kind of identifying what's important to me and where am I spending my time now and where do I want to. That's just the first step, so that's what I would encourage you to do.
That's very helpful, thank you. And pardon me for looking at my phone. These are where the questions come in. I promise I'm not on Instagram. One question did come in so far. How would you suggest employers support women in non-skilled hourly labor roles?
Ooh. It's a tough question for me. My best advice is to talk to them. I mean, I can't speak enough and highlight enough the importance of having empathy for your audience. And the best way to do that is to talk to them about what their challenges are and to get their ideas around what you can do and managing their expectations, right? It's really important not just to say, hey, what can we do for you? And then to get a list of things you can't execute on. So you have to obviously frame it properly, but that would be my best advice.
Thank you. How do you encourage organizations to begin to think differently about their mission to focus on employees?
I would say thankfully, the companies that I work with care about their employees. I guess what I find here is, because I do a lot of strategic work with businesses, it's really connecting the two. And I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but we are all a lot more focused on purpose and meaning in life, are we not? I mean, this pandemic, I think, really forced us to look at that. And it's no different for a business. I think the business just needs to also identify who do we serve, why do we serve them, and ensure that that messaging resonates with your employees, and then that you can set those employees up to contribute to that. I mean, in short, that's what I would say.
This is interesting, one I was going to ask myself, actually. We can't create more hours in a day, so it seems like one of the ways to get everything done is to scale back. How do women who have scaled back their work a bit ever regain the ground they lost professionally during those years?
Yeah, that's a tough one too. I mean, I'm going to just speak from my own experience, and I never, when I started out in my career, I never aspired to be a business owner. If you had asked me a few years ago, I would have said, you are crazy. I am not going to start my own business. And here I am, and I am very fortunate. But I think the difference is it comes back to seasons. We have to just realize where we are and what we need now, and almost not worry about too much about, years from now. But I also think this comes back to communicating. You have to know your value. You have to know what the market is paying for your job and your value. And you have to be willing to ask for it, and maybe even a little bit more, because you know that there's going to be negotiating going on. So it's just some practices like that I think we need to be mindful of.
And I think maybe that's where some of that sway comes in, and I think when you sway the other direction, there's going to be maybe a little bit of a rub when you go back, leading back into your career maybe a little bit more.
Well, the comparison comes in, right? When we step back and then we see everyone, but if you've made the decision, stay with it.
Right. Do you think it becomes more difficult for working moms if there are added layers, such as being an immigrant and minority working mom? You mentioned a little bit of this, for Latina and Black moms as well.
I mean, again, I can only speak through what I've learned from the clients that I've worked with, but recently I had there was a Black woman that I was coaching, and yes, I mean, the challenge is just as you think about very intelligent woman, very accomplished, but definitely felt like the color of her skin was preventing her from being accepted and being part of something bigger. And that too came back from us really talking a lot about her assumptions and opening up to other people. And it really comes down to us being able to communicate and to share our experiences and to listen to others and to try to understand. And even when we do have differences, know that those differences add value. So
we only know our own lived perspective, right? So sometimes it's difficult to even, I applaud that question even being asked, right? Because, there might be people who, not through any fault of their own, are just not thinking that because that's not their own lived experience, right? So, yeah, exactly. Let's see, we've got some great questions coming in, so thank you for this. You described in your presentation the ideal worker as being always available, including nights and weekends and while on vacation. Do you think companies are adapting the definition or expectation to something more balanced?
I do. I think it's, we've got a ways to go. And I think it's a good conversation just to have, within your leadership teams, even just within your own teams, on what it's not so much an ideal worker. I mean, I know that's the term that's used, but it's what does success look like? What's success and expectations look like within our team? And then be able to kind of, flex where we need to.
I think for the HR professionals in the room, too, which is everybody, right? how can organizations create that flexibility for moms in terms of, I even myself have had to say, oh, in the middle of an event, I'm so sorry, I've got to go, or I can't come to that thing tonight because I've got to go pick up my sick kid, or we've got other things going on. And thankfully, just from my personal experience, we have such a great team that steps in to help.
Yeah.
How can, organizations create those teams where, there's maybe some cross-training or something where, it's not a total disaster, right? The work has still got to get done.
I'm trying to reflect on just experiences and examples. Again, to me, it comes down to kind of change management. It's, where do we want to be and operating as a team? Where are we now, and how do we close the gaps? So we've got to look at what are the experiences we're having as a team? What are the expectations? Where is the impact, right? How are we not serving our clients, whether they're internal or external clients? And problem solve it. All of these situations are unique to your business, right? To the people on your team. So I hope that helps a little bit.
It does. I like this question. Thoughts on providing more support for working dads and making it less taboo for men to lean into their families as well, as they seem to want more and more. Possibly that might level the playing field a bit.
Yeah, I think in short, what I'll say is to be vulnerable. I work with a lot of men too, and being vulnerable for a man and talking about weaknesses, right, can be difficult. I think this comes back to kind of how we're socialized and how we're raised, that men shouldn't cry and men should be the providers, whatever the case may be. So I think it's just a matter of your willingness to talk about your challenges and what you need in a safe space with someone you trust is a place to start.
Yeah, and I think that question is right. You find, you even mentioned, just parental leave in general and more dads taking time off and having that be, less taboo.
Well, I think there's a stereotype, right, of kind of dads take care of the family, right? Mom stays home, like very antiquated, like things are changing. Our families look different today, right? And our roles need to adapt accordingly. And what works for me and my single life family is going to be different than anyone else's, right? Whether you're married or not. So.
Right. I think we make some assumptions based on stereotypes as well about we assume the default parent is the mom, and
yes.
most times it probably is.
When I talk about communication, especially for the working moms, it's not just about conversations you need to have at work. It's potentially conversations at home. And that can be, right? Sometimes it's just like, I don't want to deal with it. But that's what I mean about the tension and the change management around making that request.
Okay, it looks like we've got one more. This is an interesting one. How should an employer handle call-offs from employees who have pets as their children?
Who have what?
Pets as their children when it's consistent for being late.
Oh gosh, I don't know if I'm qualified. You saw my dog. I'm not sure how to answer that. I think you need to write a policy around that one.
What qualifies? Good. We'll end with this one then. Do you think organizations can do more to support mental well-being for working parents?
Absolutely. Sorry, I cut you off.
This was a suggestion for team yoga sessions.
Team yoga, you said?
Yes.
Definitely. I think this is also an area, and I will highlight too kind of the stereotype, right? In stereotype, whether it's the male stereotype doesn't need therapy, right? We tough it out. Or older generations, right? That, at least in my experience, what I've learned might say, we don't need therapy. You need a good, right? Suck it up, whatever the case may be. That's very stereotypical. But the point being is that we all need to, again, just identify what our own needs are and to ask accordingly.
I think those employee resource groups are potentially another opportunity
Very much so.
To go and relate to other people and be able to talk about what you're experiencing.
Yeah, I think the mental health thing is real, and this comes back to benefits in my opinion, is if you don't have a good, strong mental health aspect of your benefits that you're offering, it's really critical, because I would imagine almost everyone in this room and who is online probably is working with a therapist. So, or maybe should be, I don't know, right?
Well, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Kathy for your comments today. We very much appreciate you.